Good. Hey, Jessica, how are you?
Hey Richard, good. How are you doing?
I'm going to ask you. We're doing a little get to know Jessica, and this is for the B2B cohort. We're going to post it on so you guys can get to know Jessica a little bit more, just like I'm learning more about Jessica. So I'm going to ask you to start off, Jessica. Just give me your elevator pitch, what you do, and why you do it, I guess.
Yeah, so I am a fractional CFO or a CFO advisor for small businesses. So really providing financial leadership and strategy and decision-making support to small businesses. How I generally describe it is when the small business is sort of outgrown just bookkeeping and tax accounting services and they're looking for something more strategic, more strategic in terms of financial guidance, that's where I can step in and help them plan out their longer term, short term and long term growth strategy, and help them scenario plan and mock out their financial P&L, for the longer term for their business.
I love your elevator pitch, and I was looking at your LinkedIn. You're so concise in terms of what you do, and so well positioned. Like you talk about specific markets that you serve, and you actually have history in those markets. So maybe I'll just dig into that a little bit. Like the consumer goods, retail, health, and wellness. You have work history in those fields, and like so you've niched down to that market as well intentionally, right?
Yeah, so I mean, I spent almost 18 years in consumer packaged goods, pharmaceutical goods, and in retail, and really navigating how packaged goods get listed in larger retailers, and then also how larger retailers really view the products that they're offering as a category, and also looking at category trends, and margins and things like trade spend. I don't know anyone outside of consumer packaged goods understand this, but like when you go into a retailer and you see something on sale, usually it's the supplier or the brand owner that's paying for some of that, and it's called trade spend support. So really helping like larger businesses map out their unit economics so that they account for that type of promotional spending, and still be profitable. And then on a small business side, now I can offer that type of expertise and knowledge, into helping smaller brand owners really get into those larger retailers while still being able to be profitable and scale profitably, taking into account the fact that they do need to start spending trade spend.
It's interesting because I was just reading up. So I have a buddy, Sanjay, that used to be a part of this group. He's gotten busy and doing other things now. He comes from that same world, and he was talking about that same sort of like the transition of getting into retail. And I've seen a couple of businesses do it. One place I work right now, Northern Commerce, they spawned off a couple of companies that they were doing marketing with. One's in the juice business, and now recently one's protein candy kind of thing. So this whole movement of going from I've got a product, I'm going to start selling it. You don't just jump into a wholesaler. You got to kind of earn your way up. And often I see what the path is like selling direct to consumer, getting some revenue flow, just testing products and seeing getting some validity that they're good and quality and whatnot back. What's would you like? I know you do. I'm going to ask you about some of the startup stuff that you do as well. Would you ever entertain a company that was not quite there for the wholesale and retail world? Like, what's the earliest company that you would dig into?
Yeah, so I do think there's more and more opportunities with direct to consumer, especially in the Canadian environment, because the Canadian retail environment is so dominated by massive retailers, and they're all owned by the same conglomerates, right? And so that is a bit of a gatekeeping situation that some of the smaller suppliers have a lot of difficulty entering into. Um, I do advise on the early startups, mostly in the fact that when you're setting your pricing, you do want to make sure that if it is sort of in your long-term plan to eventually get into those larger retails, you're at least pricing yourself in a way that gives you the margin to scale into that, because the margin in terms of direct to consumer versus through those retailers, it's going to be very different, but you don't want to start your pricing off too low gain scale at that price. Now your consumers expecting it at that price, and you won't be able to launch into a larger retailer at that same price. So it's really in the very early stages, I advise basically on that, like really just hammering it home in terms of your financial model should account for where you hope to be longer term.
The percentage wise, if you don't mind sharing, what would be the difference between the direct to consumer profit percentage, profit margin versus like you going into retail and you're losing to gain entrance to a bigger market?
So not accounting for things like trade spend or marketing, I would say direct to consumer, your margin is probably closer to 40 to 50%. But once you start cutting in a larger retailer, your own margin could be could be less than 10% in terms of like of the retail price. So that's just some of the reality, but then you gain a lot of scale, right? So like you get into a large retailer, suddenly you're across Canada, suddenly you have access maybe into the US market. And so what you lose in terms of margin, you might actually gain in terms of absolute dollar value, and reach and brand building. So it's really just sort of making sure though that you don't do it at a loss, because all that reach isn't worth it if you're not making any profit back to yourself in the end.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in other calls, like the challenge of growing too fast, right? Like if you're doing great in direct to sales, or sorry, direct to consumer, and then you go to retail and it opens up too much, and the scale is you grow too fast as a result of that. Like what kind of things? I mean, we talked about like cash flow as one, like even just buying material to create the products that you're doing and just waiting, like there could be delay in payment, because the retailer has a little bit more clout than
Absolutely.
you. Yeah. So what other things do
Yeah.
you run into?
Yeah, so cash flow is a really big one. It's a very big change. So when you're doing direct to consumer, you will front the cash obviously to get your inventory, but then when the consumers are buying, your revenue is coming in at the time that they're buying. Whereas when you move to a larger scale retailer, you're fronting a larger amount of inventory up front because they're buying at scale. But oftentimes they won't pay, they'll give you like 60, 90-day payment terms. So they will receive that, and then they actually won't pay you for the inventory until 90 days later. So that ties up all of your capital. And so that's something you need to watch out for. Also, the larger retailers, they'll do like the trade spend, which is basically when you plan promotional activity through their retail outlets. As a supplier, you're paying for that, but they'll deduct it from what they owe you 90 days later. So if you had a promotional sale and you sold that inventory, say at $10 per case, but then you had ran a sale that, back charged $5 a case for a short period of time, the revenue coming in is not going to be that $10 per case. It's going to be the $5 per case. And so you need to very strategically plan that so that you don't end up with a zero cash balance situation and can't make payroll. So everything has to be very well planned and executed and meticulously maintained.
Have you ever ran into a situation, and maybe have that where a client just isn't ready for that yet? They have the opportunity come, but you might want to advise against it, or is that just like a silly move? You get the opportunity, you got to go for it. You just got to restructure.
So like the good news in that sense is that large retailers actually plan almost a year in advance. So even if somebody said, "Hey, I want to list your product," you still have sort of a good chunk of time to really plan that out, because they need to blow out their old inventory of potentially a different product just to make room for your product. So generally you're going to get a pretty good lead time to sort it out. And then I would say, try to get an estimate of what their initial order size will be so that you can start applying for loans, just to bankroll or bridge that sort of cash flow.
Yeah, this is good. I won't go too much more on that because those are pretty heavy questions, and I appreciate you sharing. You obviously know your stuff. You got it right at the tip of your tongue. I'm gonna ask some other stuff, more personal stuff, if that's okay. Like for example, I've got two boys. One of them's in university now, his fourth year university. He'll be going fifth year. He's kind of taking his time on that. And then another one just about to go into the college. So I looked at you, I always look at where people kind of started off from an education perspective, and you did a Bachelor of Science. You obviously got some smarts. You went to University of Toronto, did Bachelor of Science, and then went from that, you did Chartered Accountant. Like, tell me a little about what, how did you make that change? That was a big change from a learning perspective.
Yeah, I guess it is. I mean, so I went into science because in high school, I never really considered, what I was going to do. I just knew I liked science. So I went to university, I did science. Never really decided that I was going to go the medicine route, which a lot of people go into life sciences for that. But I kind of realized early on that I didn't want to be a doctor. Like I just don't have that like desire to see patients. But I finished the degree just because of interest. And then I started working in pharmaceuticals. But it was more a business development analyst within the pharmaceutical industry. So there was the need to have some sort of scientific knowledge to really understand what's going on in that industry, and also liaising with the scientists and the technicians that are in that industry. But my work was really in business development, and running some analytics for the business development units. So then from there, I went and did my CPA designation, just to get more exposure into the business and the analytics side of things, because of my background really came from science. But I think it's still like a very transferable thing, because like science is very like analytical, testing theories. And what I found when I went more into the business development analytics, you still get a lot of that. Like you still kind of look at, say, a promotion or a consumer's interaction with a brand, and there's still insights and analytics coming out of that. So I think the skills and the interest was really transferable. And so that's just sort of where my passion's at. I'm just like, hey, I'm still a scientist at heart, but I'm just applying it more in a business sense.
Oh, I love that. I love how those two kind of mesh together as well. And like the pharmaceutical, you're often in a retail setting, so that kind of like there's a natural flow there, right? That's really cool. I could share. I would say innate, like, so I have my wife's friend cousin is she's got a PhD in literature arts, right? And a lot of people kind of throw away that as a learning opportunity, but there's so much statistics behind. Like, you need to know stats in almost everything you do. If you're doing any kind of research, you have to back it up with analytical numbers. So there's some tie-ins for everything in there to take you back to a business or to stay where you are. So I love that story, that back end. Tell me, so you also started, I'm flipping all over the place now, but you also started a partnership in Women's Equity Lab, and you're a community partner in a startup ecosystem. And you, one other thing, throwing too much at you one time, you're a founder and travel designer. I'll start there because that's one that's just interesting. The every wander. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Every Wander is just a bit of a passion project. It's really, as I left my corporate world and started navigating my own entrepreneurial experience, I was trying to take, things that I was passionate about and turn that into, I guess, like a business opportunity for myself. But what I really started to discover was I just like traveling, and I like traveling with like creating trips and bringing friends along and making friends. So Every Wander really started as, hey, can I be a travel agent? And then really realizing I don't necessarily want to be a travel agent, but I do want to design group trips. And what I was finding as I was kind of going out and networking was that there's a lot of women in their like mid 30s to 60s who want to travel, but the more and more they're traveling solo, but they don't want to travel like solo by themselves. They want to travel solo, but with friends, partially for safety reasons, but also because people want to share their experience with other people. They don't necessarily just want to go somewhere by themselves, and they could stay at home by themselves at that point, right? So I was really finding that, and I think it's been a really nice experience just sort of creating that community around travel experience, around something that I really enjoy doing.
So I got to introduce you. So another guy in the group who's been busy, hasn't been showing up, Rod Lilly. He did a stint. So him and I have known each other a long, long time, and then going back to our probably, I want to say 20s, right? Maybe a little later than that. I'm trying to remember when we actually met. but he did a stint where he had some health issues, and he's like, it was like a wake up call for him. And he's like, you know what, Rich, I'm gonna work on a cruise line. And he did it for years because he just liked to travel, and it gave him an opportunity. He took on some IT role and cruise line. After he came out of that, he started doing promoting trips and things like that. So you guys would have a good conversation. He's a web developer by trade, so he's a data.
Nice.
He's a techie guy, but he has this other side of him that wanted to explore this. So it's interesting that you guys do that kind of stuff together, and I could totally see where your strength, what you do on like your planning and all that, like how that could lend itself to that, and then you enjoy it. My wife watches a ton of influencers, like travel influencers, whatever. I just see that as the world gets, social media explores, you just need these little experts to kind of guide you through all the mess, right? And I think the big companies aren't doing that anymore. So I can totally see these things being so useful where if somebody just discovers, oh my God, I met Jessica, she's gonna help me do this. And it's like an individual to an individual type of business rather than like, this massive travel agency, right? So that one was
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely.
Tell me about community partner in the startup ecosystem. Tell me about that. Like, I mean, that's an obvious. I could see that where your skills would help people in there, but tell me how you got into
Yeah,
it.
so more and more I'm joining a lot of these ecosystems and business incubators, because as I was kind of going out there with my own entrepreneurial endeavors, I was really starting to become more and more inspired by other people starting their own businesses. Like the attitude for entrepreneurs and startup communities is very different than what I was experiencing in the corporate world, right? Like, so I think like in the corporate world, there's a lot of complacency. There's a lot of like, this thing is so big, there's nothing, I'll never change anything, and then sort of move on. But then like it was such a 180 when I was started networking with more and more entrepreneurs and startups. Like they're just more driven. They see problems, and instead of just being like, oh, it is what it is, they want to do something about it. And I found that really inspiring. Um, and also I found like the more and more I talk to people, the more and more people are saying the financial aspect of the startup community is a bit of a gap everywhere. There's a lot of like business modeling and stuff, but no ability to sort of translate people's business models into like a financial projection. And so like I've really recognized that that's the key piece that I'm actually really good at. And I want to support these entrepreneurs who are developing something that could change the world, that are going to have an impact. And so more and more I'm getting involved in those types of ecosystems.
It's funny. I used to be hooked on the Dragon's Den and Shark Tank and all those things, right? And when it comes down to it, they always narrow down to financials, right? And if you don't have a good, like, they just rip you apart, right? But as a business, when you're a business owner, you feel like you got to earn a certain amount of revenue before you can have you have the funds to basically afford somebody like you to take care of your work. But you kind of need them early. They need you early on, but they just don't. In my own mind, I don't think, oh, I can't afford Jessica. Like, I haven't earned enough revenue to justify bringing somebody like that on. But there's so much you can do right with the business so early that just to get them set on the right plane, and just like things like getting loans, getting credit, like dealing with credit, dealing with like all the issues that we talked about earlier, growing too fast, all those can help. Last question is the Women's Equity Lab. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Women's Equity Lab is an angel investing group. So I'm also getting more and more involved in some of these angel investing groups. So Women Equity Lab and the 51. What I was really finding is that women-owned businesses, they don't get their fair share of investment. They also don't get their fair share of business loans. They're often held to some biases and some differing criteria when they do their pitches or when they apply to their business loans. And so Women Equity Lab is a group of angel investors who are only women. And so by being an only woman angel investing group, they eliminate some of that bias that, like, if a woman-owned business is pitching to an all-male platform, there's some biases that will be eliminated when they're pitching to all women instead. And the way it really works is that all the angels are sort of pooling together their funds so that they can give, so that each angel doesn't have to cut a massive check, but they can give the businesses a larger check by pooling their funds. And it's this similar idea with the 51, which is also a women investing group, investing in women-owned businesses. So I think more and more, I believe in being part of the change that I want to see. And so eliminating some of these biases by being a women-only angel group is something I'm feeling more and more passionate about getting involved in.
I heard a stat recently, and you've probably seen it too in the news too. Like they're looking at the gender gap in universities. Like it's in general, and overall general, it's like a 60-40 split now from females to males. Like, and that's been a trend that's been happening for the last 20 years. It's just been what's happening is there's more women going to university, and men have not been growing as much. So they created that gap. And it depends on the school you go to, it'll drastically change. But the one thing they're saying still is there's still a gap in pay. There's still, even though women are tending to be more highly educated, going for the graduate programs and whatnot, they're still not there at pay. But that is just a matter of time. Well, that'll switch. So I think these two opportunities you're in they're primed to start to grow. Like there's more women coming through with graduate degrees and more higher educated. They're going to be. This is going to be an opportunity for them to grow further. Is there anything else I could have asked you that I didn't ask that you want to share with our group?
No, not that I can think of. I think this was a really great experience, actually.
Well, you've been great. I mean,
I
I was like, I don't know. I don't think I could have done as well as you have done with answering all those questions. But I mean, this is obviously your experience and expertise. This is just like stuff for you. But this is what you do, kind of thing. It's exciting to have you in the group, Jessica. You're bringing a wealth of experience, and you just got a different kind of I love where you're growing in terms of taking what you've learned from other entrepreneurs and seeking out ways to solve problems that you might have not been able to do in those other organizations. So it's exciting, and it's good to meet you and good to continue to get to know you better. So thanks for sharing with everybody.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, I'm going to hang up now for real. And I'm going to see you later today. We got our revenue group meeting, so I'll see you again today. I'm going to try and get this up on our site before our group and let people know about it. So thanks again for volunteering and letting us get to know you a little better.
That's good. Thank you.
All right. See you, Jessica. Bye now.